restless.
Even in the raucous Kennedy clan, even among his 8 brothers and sisters, Jack stood out. He kept his own schedule, usually late. He was apt to test the patience of his elders, unconcerned with rules and loose with money. He plied shopkeepers with the promise that his father would pay the bill, whatever it was.
Jack would expect maids to take care of him, cook his meals, do his laundry, pick up his clothes. And so he has a very privileged childhood, except for one thing, that he is burdened by a series of considerable health problems.
Jack almost died of scarlet fever in 1920, just before his 3rd birthday. 2 years later, a case of whooping cough landed him in another quarantine ward. Soon after, his parents shipped him off to a prestigious boarding school in Connecticut. Jack's letters home began to include reports of his shaky health. At Choate, Jack's ongoing digestive ailments made him a reliable customer of the campus infirmary.
Jack didn't know what was wrong with him. All he knew was that on a regular basis, he would take sick, get a high fever, end up in the hospital, that he couldn't gain weight, that he couldn't run around and play sports the way he wanted to.
He was terribly thin. He had recurrent bouts of nausea and vomiting, continual bouts of high fever, and he was tired all the time.
Joe Sr. worried that Jack might take on the image of someone who lacked the physical strength to achieve great things in life. By the time he was 17 years old, his health was so questionable, they sent him off to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, to try and figure out what his problems were.
Test results at Mayo indicated that Jack suffered from an intestinal inflammation called colitis. But the doctors warned him that he might have hepatitis, or worse, leukemia. When his blood count dropped to near-fatal readings, he made light. "They call me 2,000 to go Kennedy," he wrote a friend. "Took a peek at my chart yesterday and could see that they were mentally measuring me for a coffin."
He never stops joking and laughing, even in the worst circumstances. When the wife of his headmaster at Choate comes, she says, "Jack never stopped kidding around with me the whole time I was there."
He had to become very stoic, and at the same time, he had to project an image of vitality. So although he was feeling poorly a lot of the time, he couldn't let on that he was feeling poorly.
Joe Sr. refused to lower expectations for his second son, whatever his illness. "Don't let me lose confidence in you again," Joe wrote to Jack after a less than sterling report from the headmaster at Choate, "because it will be nearly an impossible task to restore it."
Joe Kennedy Sr. drives this point home to his sons. Joe Kennedy's message to them is, second is never good enough. Only first, only winning, only being at the top.
Joe Jr. was picked out, you're gonna be president, and Joe was determined to please Dad and was gonna do whatever Dad wanted. He was a familiar type, student body president, captain of teams, best-looking boy, destined for success. Jack was one step away. Yes, he wanted to please Dad, but he might think about it for a second. And there stirred in him a little quiet, and maybe even more than quiet, rebellion.
The problem with Jack, at least for his father, is he doesn't take anything seriously. Nothing. At Choate, where there is a strict prep school behavioral code, where the last thing you do is snicker or make fun of your teachers or talk behind their backs. Jack just can't help himself. You know, the more pompous the headmaster, the more ridiculous the speeches at chapel, the more he feels absolutely compelled not only to make fun himself, but to draw his circle of friends in. When he organizes a prank, all the other boys are in.
Jack Kennedy was a capable student in the courses he liked, indifferent to those he didn't. His acquaintance with the rules of spelling and grammar appeared fleeting. He spent much of his depleted energy on campus hijinks, or romance. Even in high school, his roster of conquests was a source of wonderment. "It can't be my good looks," he wrote to a Choate friend, "because I'm not much handsomer than anybody else. It must be my personality." When Jack announced his decision to join his prep school friends at Princeton, instead of following Joe Jr. to Harvard, his father made his disappointment known. "You want to get away from your brother, I take it. Too much competition." Fall term 1936, Jack enrolled at Harvard.
The Kennedys were a loving family, but bitterly competitive. This comes from the father, but it becomes entrenched with him. They're always putting each other down, verbally, games, sailing, touch football, nonstop competition. And a lot of it's joyous, but there's an edge there too, almost a meanness.
Where Joe Jr. and Jack were concerned, friends remembered, everything was a contest. Whether a swim in the pool or a race to the breakfast table.
Jack was always smaller, punier. He never gave up, and he always got beat up. It was par for the course.
Jack would indulge in these sort of hit-and-run attacks, and it would frustrate Joe Jr., who would dash after him. But Jack was fast, and Joe wouldn't necessarily catch him. And so Jack learned how to compete in an effective way in a world where he wasn't always the biggest, the strongest, or the smartest.
Bye, Rosie. Come on, Jack. Come on, Jack. Come on,